Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Spiceworks Partner Webinar. My name's Ophelia with the community, and today's session is being brought to you by Wilson Connectivity. We've got experts here ready to discuss the importance of owning all of your networks and how IT can improve security, compliance, and productivity by optimizing cell connectivity. But I've got a few reminders before we get started. This session will be available on demand, so if you miss anything or have to step away, you'll be able to view the full presentation at your convenience once we finish. There are additional resources available about today's topic, so be sure to click the Docs tab to access all of that information. We encourage you to ask our speakers questions, which you can submit throughout the session, and we'll get to as many as we can before we finish. And lastly, if you want to chat with your fellow webinar friends, feel free to join in the conversation. Just a reminder, our chat does follow community guidelines, so be sure to keep things fun and professional and stick around to the end where we will announce our prize winner. So with that, I'll pass things over to you, Jim, to get us started.
Thanks, Ophelia. So yeah, welcome everyone to today's discussion. We're going to be talking about how businesses can improve security, compliance, and productivity by boosting their cell connectivity. So as Ophelia said, I'm Jim Raposa. I'm the VP and Principal Analyst at Aberdeen Strategy and Research, part of Spiceworks. And joining me today are Frank Straka, Director of Enterprise Business Development at Panduit. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you.
Frank's going to be bringing his expertise around IT infrastructure and cabling, so he'll be really welcome. And also joining us is Angela Fanzo, National Sales Director, Enterprise Commercial Real Estate at Wilson Connectivity. And Angela, why don't you tell us a little bit about that last point there about Wilson Connectivity?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Thanks, Jim. So it's an exciting time here at Wilson. We just at Mobile World Congress launched and rebranded our new name. So we went from Wilson Electronics to Wilson Connectivity. Really speaks volumes about our organization, about truly driving connectivity within property, which regardless of the vertical. So exciting times.
Thanks, Angela. I'm glad for clearing that up for anyone who's had those questions. So yeah, let's get into this. So, you know, for IT and infrastructure management at most businesses, when it comes to control and visibility into networks and the activity on those networks, pretty much everything connected to them, all of this, it's a requirement. And this is really even more true when you look at modern environments that are doing things like utilizing smart networks and smart building infrastructures, all of which need to be fully interconnected for security, for monitoring, and for better management. But, you know, a key element that may not be top of mind for many IT departments is cellular connectivity. You know, when you look at smart building technologies, as well as users bringing BYOD devices, it's a redundancy, but, you know, bringing BYOD and personal devices, when you look at that cellular connectivity, it's really a key foundation for all network activity. And what it turns out is that this can be an issue for IT departments who lack control and management and visibility into these networks. In our research here at Aberdeen, we found that 25% of businesses find poor cellular connectivity, to be a top IT challenge. And 40% say that poor connectivity negatively impacts productivity. So, you know, there's real impacts from this. And the problem is when this becomes an issue, when it becomes a problem, everyone turns to IT to address it. But traditionally, cellular wasn't part of IT. It wasn't even considered when building a network infrastructure. It was really seen as something that the carriers handle, which, to be honest, is less and less true today. And when you look at things like compliance, privacy, security requirements, as they're becoming more strict, IT is going to find that increasing amounts of data are actually moving on cellular networks that they aren't managing. So that's why today we're seeing more and more enterprise clients, they're addressing their cellular needs as a network requirement. And we're seeing new solutions that are actually making it easier for IT to improve self-service, and manage all of the networks and connectivity in their buildings. So today we're going to talk about how IT can expand control over networks and connectivity, and how this can really easily fit into the planning process and into your building network when you're building a network infrastructure. So when you're looking at the core foundation for in-building technology, it really comes down to having a rich and robust fiber network. And when we're ensuring a strong network design, it's really critical for scalability, for redundancy, and for future-proofing. But what happens is when you bring cellular into the picture, it really changes everything. And so I want to start with you, Frank. You know a lot about that initial design, about infrastructure and cabling. What are you seeing as the key trends and issues for structured infrastructures today?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So, a lot on that topic, right? That you're mentioning, and really at Panduit, we're seeing really a world of change that's things have been done the same way for a long time, and there's a lot of things that can be done differently. A big element of this is when you start looking at smart building technologies, other things that are on the horizon, is traditionally enterprise networks, as they've been historically looked at, have really been there to support, really the data transmission. And so that's been always, a simple example is running a, RJ45 to the desk, right? And, you have internet then at your computer. That's evolved a little bit and saying now, okay, you're going to run, that same cable up to maybe an access point, a wireless access point, a camera, those devices. So again, nothing too revolutionary. The stage we're at right now in IT infrastructure is, can that structured cabling, can those, the twisted pair category 6, category 6A cables be really the basis of the foundation for almost everything in the building, right? I mean, that's the fundamentals of a smart building. So running power and data to just about everywhere, right? So lighting, your HVAC system, in addition to that, as we're talking on this webinar, your, in-building cellular networks, right? So that really is where we're trying to do, is this fundamental, we call it convergence as well, of all these technologies over Ethernet and over structured cabling. And historically, the way buildings have always been laid out, and we don't really see this trend changing much, even with, this whole potential explosion of these technologies, is you really are going to run, let's say, a fiber backbone through the building. So you maybe have your central location, and then you have fiber going up to a bunch of different telecom rooms or TRs in the building. Those are, you have your fiber connections there going to, let's say, a switch, and then you're running copper from out there. So then you're running, let's say, a category 6 or category 6A cabling, gigabit to 10 gigabit network, outside of the TR to all of your end devices. And so that's historically how it's been done. We see elements like that continuing to stay the same, but, really having potentially a lot more, cable and devices being run out of that network, out of that TR, as more and more devices get pulled onto the network. So fundamentally today, that's where we're sitting with all of this, and that's where we see, the kind of the trends right now within our industry. So back to you, Jim.
Yeah, Angela, I'd love to hear your point of view on some of these trends from the cellular side. I mean, what are you seeing on that side?
No, absolutely. I think Frank is 100% correct. We're in the cellular world, historically, Dash has been, not a high priority for IT or for facilities managers. And typically they would need a separate kind of network, a very robust copper network. And today we're seeing more convergence from a cellular network onto what we call infrastructure cabling, standard IT cabling. And so these systems now are becoming more intelligent. They're becoming more small form factor and more efficient. And so when we meet with our clients, regardless of the vertical, the question of cellular comes up, and they ask the same question every time, where it's, how much fiber do you need? They want to know if they have existing fiber that they can leverage, or will they need to pull more cabling? Because today we're seeing more and more properties wanting to reduce the number of cables within their infrastructure for ESG initiatives, right? So how can they reduce carbon footprint? Can we leverage the same IT infrastructure they currently have for a cellular system? And the reality is we can. So we've seen that trend. We're seeing that being asked a little bit more. And I would say, though, it comes with a little nervousness, right? Because it's still, cellular networks are still somewhat new to facility managers or IT. And you had mentioned it. Historically, this is something the carriers would take care of. And we just know that that's not happening today. So.
Yeah, great points there. Before we continue on, we do have a poll question, a short poll question for the attendees that we're going to put up in a second here. It's kind of like a two-parter. We want to know yes or no. Has IT and or facility management started to look towards wireless convergence on your network infrastructure? So yes or no there. But also we want to know, has it impacted the network cabling infrastructure? We'd love to hear in the chat from all of you if you've had those impacts. So give you a second. And Angela, you and I were talking about this a little earlier about some of the trends around the convergence here.
Yeah, no, there definitely is a convergence happening. There is, as we're looking toward enterprise really leveraging cellular connectivity within their properties, one, they want to leverage the infrastructure they currently have, and that's standard IT cabling. And like Frank said, a robust fiber network is going to be needed. But then what other technology can you leverage the cellular connectivity to go ahead and accommodate for? And that could be, public safety. It could be for IoT devices. It could be for your UHF maintenance radios, right? All can ride on that one layer of technology for a cellular network that, again, is fed by your infrastructure network. And what that does, it becomes more efficient, like within your property. So we're seeing ways where those discussions are happening today, like how can we deploy out a cellular network to make it more efficient? Could they manage it? Can they own it? Can they operate it? And also, how can they, leverage what they currently have within their infrastructure cabling? So it's definitely happening. Where convergence, it's nothing new. It's just how we go about it. So.
Great. Yeah, it's a pretty close vote. Still a little bit more saying no. They haven't started to move towards wireless convergence, but over 40% have. So I think that's that's a good sign that businesses are kind of looking towards this. I know we also talked about that at the beginning about we weren't totally sure how many businesses would be saying yes or no. So I mean, that's a pretty good indicator there.
Jim, and I would add, and I'll maybe ask Frank this too. I mean, this is a great indicator as we're seeing this, and we are looking at more convergence and more things riding on the network. What we know is technology is becoming more advanced. We're pushing, as Frank said, more data. More data typically will mean more bandwidth. So it's going to have a direct impact on that network cabling infrastructure. So I'm sure, Frank, I mean, have you seen the need to, over your 10-year, to increase the amount of fibers you have in the facility? Be curious to understand what Panduit says about that.
I would say right now, I mean, what's been interesting about the networks is that I would say from a fiber optic perspective, there hasn't been a huge increase in the amount of fiber that's been run within a building, right? I would say there's certain types of technologies out there, let's say passive optical networks, where yes, there would be a big impact, but that technology has historically been niche and, kind of confined to specific vertical markets rather than seeing broad adoption. Like I said, from our standpoint, what we've seen is that, I'd say the change that may have, that has occurred is that at some point, it would probably have been an all copper network, throughout a building. And the big upgrade or, the difference now is that, we'd really see that, it's right now it's a fiber copper combination, right? Where, fiber is going to be, really what's going around your network, and then copper is going to be what's going to attach to your endpoint. So that has been a change that we've seen in these networks, is that, and again, it's just it's for the reach and it's for, the extra data.
Sure.
People had, the copper's stuck around for a long time because, for a lot of enterprise applications, it's sufficient bandwidth and it's, provides the power as well. But, fiber optics, they've continued to, they've made a lot of progress as well in terms of pricing, right? It used to be very expensive to deploy, fiber from a transceiver standpoint, especially certain types of them. And, those prices have also come down quite a bit. So, so from our standpoint within an enterprise, I would say that, we don't see the ratio and the mix fundamentally changing much going forward, for the reasons I've stated. But I would say that, unlike maybe 10 years ago, fiber has certainly established, its place within the enterprise.
Great. Yeah, no, those are great points. And it kind of gets to our next questions, which is around challenges, which I also liked somebody mentioned in the metal buildings blocking cellular signals, which I actually ran into with a friend's restaurant that I helped cable once. So I totally understand that. But so there's one challenge right there. But also, when we look at our research and we asked businesses what the top IT challenges were for building these kind of networks, we mentioned poor connectivity as a top challenge. Lack of control and management options was another one of the top challenges, and the ability to ensure strong security. So, when you're adding cellular to the equation, I feel like there's a lot of kind of misconceptions about cost and complexity, and those misconceptions themselves add additional hurdles. So, Angela, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the challenges, some of the pain points, some of these, issues that you've heard about from customers that you've seen when it comes to dealing with these types of connectivity?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So, I think the number one misconception is, it's cellular networks inside your building is going to be expensive. I think historically, DAS or distributed antenna systems has got a bad rap, whether that's because of installation rates or the architecture. But as they evolved over the years, the installation of these systems to become a little more easy and easier to manage as well. And so one of the misconceptions also is that if you install that, will the carriers bring the service? And the reality is they don't anymore. And so we're seeing that shift where carriers are turning off their funding, right? They're focused other areas. And so your enterprise market, regardless of the vertical, has to go ahead and account for bringing this in as almost as a utility, a fourth utility. Because you're going to require it. And I'm seeing in the chat right now, tablets are being used on construction sites, cell phones. And then, another misconception is, well, who's going to manage this? And, historically, IT stayed away from it, facility managers stay away from it. But now these systems that are becoming more intelligent, are becoming more user-friendly. And therefore, we're putting more control into facilities management and IT, where they can at least do that first layer of triage, right? Of troubleshooting the network, ensuring that the network stays up, and quality service. They can respond quicker. So, there's a lot of misconceptions on if it's a cellular and, I pay for my cellular network, it's Verizon, T-Mobile, or AT&T, that they have to own it and they have to operate it. But today you can actually own these networks. And and you can leverage them in many different ways. So it's definitely changing. It's evolved over time, and it continues to evolve.
Great. Frank, is there anything you like to add? You don't have to, but if there's anything you'd like to add from as far as challenges or hurdles that you've seen?
So again, we haven't been as focused on this area, but certainly I think what I've seen and my understanding of what people like you have done, Angelo, is in the past the technology, it was, to your point, there's confusion on who owns it, right? From, is it the cellular system, is it you guys, what advantages do you get? Is it really the best system to go with? Because then you also have to deal with the multiple carriers. How do you install it? Who installs it? Is it a different ecosystem? Historically, there's been a lot of confusion over it. And, I think at the point we're also making on this webinar is, the fact that, historically, these are coax systems that are getting installed, right? So you were fundamentally running wires throughout the building that were completely different than the IT infrastructure that you were putting in. And, really, as you're going to upgrade, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding was in a lot of cases, you might even have to run different wires now. But as the industry is transitioning to fiber optics, and I think this is a big point that people like you should be making in the industry, is you're essentially now putting in a future-proof cabling system. And from our standpoint at Panduit, future-proofing has always been a huge element of building networks, right? You're not, the wires behind the walls can last. We have a 25-year warranty. They last forever, right? And they're a pain to, you're supposed to get rid of them if they're not being used. So they're a pain to get rid of, and then they're a pain to run new ones when the building's occupied. But now when you guys are talking about running fiber optics, that sounds to me that, okay, when 6G comes out, right, it's going to be the same underlying cabling that you guys have in the industry right now versus something that would be totally new and different. And, you'd have the added, quite complicated step of running new wires. Because people often don't think of that, right? Is that, if you have all the walls up and you need to run a whole bunch of new wires, that is, you're going to be doing it when people are not in the building. So you're going to be paying a lot of money. It's very labor intensive. It's very time intensive. So, you're really, the cost of the wire at that point is far less than the cost of the labor and, all the installation elements to it. So to me, I've seen the problems in the past. I've heard about some of them, but I do think, where you guys are going as an industry, is going to really alleviate a lot of those problems.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I agree.
Don't steal too much for future proofing. That's one of our upcoming points to bring up too. But that was a great setup for that. But first, I want to talk a little bit. In our research, we consistently find that proper upfront preparation and planning, it's really critical for any IT infrastructure initiative, and especially when you get into core network infrastructure. So how are businesses doing this vital planning? What are they using to give IT and facility managers the ability to prepare for, to manage, to monitor cellular systems? Angela, I guess I'll start with you. So one, what have been the traditional limitations when it comes to managing and monitoring cellular, and how is this changing?
Yeah, so I'll step back. So for far as planning goes, depending on if it's a brownfield or a greenfield, if it's a greenfield opportunity and, Wilson Connectivity is in there and we're talking with the end client, we're going to, try to help understand what technology are they going to try to leverage the cellular system for, and what other technologies are they going to be pulling into their facility. And that will help kind of determine how robust their infrastructure is going to need, how much fiber, how much copper, would it be Cat 6A, right? And so that way they know they're planning for those future technologies, not just for today, but also for tomorrow. And then once the system is in, then as far as who maintains it and who monitors it. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that these systems are becoming more intelligent. And so typically on most cellular systems, they're going to be some kind of GUI, right? And as long as you have some kind of remote monitoring, you can actually have alerts and notifications pushed to your cell phones, pushed to your email on a daily or on a weekly report to kind of check on the status of these cellular systems. And therefore, you're giving more control to that facility manager or that IT department to actually maintain and operate and basically monitor these systems. Whereas in the past, they're a little bit more technical, different cabling, as Frank mentioned. So therefore, they didn't want to touch it. But now, if you have an alarm go off that maybe says it's a dirty fiber, well, IT is used to cleaning fiber ends, right? And they can go clean a fiber end and reconnect it and see if it did away with the alarm, versus calling, a wireless integrator to come out and troubleshoot it. That first level of troubleshooting is something now that the facility managers and IT folks can handle.
Okay. So, we've been talking about the myths and the misconceptions. We've seen how it's possible to overcome some of these challenges and issues we've talked about. I know in our research, we look at, what the strategies that leaders, those businesses in the top, 20, 30% of our networking success metrics, we look at what they're following. When we look at them, some of their key strategies are they do deploy end-to-end monitoring. They do implement full network integration. They do ensure that they have strong network analytics. All of this is how they build successful connectivity. And as you mentioned, we're seeing new solutions and technologies that really enable IT to improve performance, boost coverage, and gain control over their on-premises networks. So I'm going to two-part question. I guess I'll start with you, Frank. First, on the infrastructure, what are some of the ways you've seen businesses overcome challenges and improve? And then, Angela, if you can kind of answer how they're doing that on the cellular side, I think that would be a good start for this conversation. So I'll start with you, Frank, or either one of you can start.
Businesses overcome challenges and improve. So really, I'd say the biggest, going back to something that we recommend, right, is, and we're specifically speaking to the structured cabling side of it, right? It's always been space constraints. How do you do more with less, space and whatnot? And, how do you ensure that this network is going to be running, let's say for 25 years, right? And so, we often recommend, and, we're starting to see a lot, the growth on it's been very good, pushing the higher performance cabling levels, right? You can go out and buy a Cat 5e, a Cat 6, or a Cat 6a cable. But you also know that, you go spend a little bit more money, you get that Cat 6a cable, you're going to get the performance. Similar on fiber, right? You can buy the different multi-mode levels, go single mode, whatever it is, putting in the best you can at the time, it really saves you a lot of money down the road. Another thing to consider, right, is, in some of these industries, structured cabling in and of itself does solve a lot of problems people may have with their infrastructure. So if you can imagine, right, you're in an office and let's say you decide that, hey, there's, we're going, there's a lot more hybrid now. So we want to take this whole cube area and make it into meeting space, right? If you weren't running that structured cabling network, right, where you're running essentially a backbone cable, to a TR and then, moving out from there, managing that infrastructure can be very, very challenging because, let's face it, the other option is probably a point-to-point connection where you're going from, let's say the switch to the end device. That's very challenging to relocate and, repurpose and, redeploy versus when it's a structured cabling, you're ultimately only going to be redeploying a very, very small portion of the link. Maybe you rip out the cable and you put something else in. And so, from a Panduit standpoint, selling, really trying to put in a structured cabling solution, putting in, that high performing cabling that allows you that, future proofing factor. That is, you may not think of it at the time, but in 5-10 years, you'll be very grateful you did. And then just, ensuring you are working with vendors, let's say like Panduit, there are others that offer you, really a high quality system that we stand behind it, and we'll offer you features that make just the overall ownership of it, really that look, not just going out and buying the lowest cost, but really thinking of that lowest total installed cost that a company like Panduit can offer you. So there's a lot of factors involved here in terms of what the infrastructure can do, and I hope I touched on most of them here. So Jim.
Yeah, I mean, Angela, if you can answer that question from the cellular side, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think, when we look at cellular, and if we go back a little bit in time, during COVID, everyone left and it was working from home, right? And they got used to their home luxuries, right? Being able to be mobile, being able to use their own network. And now as we start returning to the office, and we haven't done that yet 100%, businesses, again, regardless of the vertical, are looking at ways to replicate your experience that you had at home. And one of those is with mobility. And so, ensuring that your facility has a robust mobility network, and whether that's with a private network, private 5G, whether that's a public 5G or 4G network, or even if it's a Wi-Fi network, that wireless connectivity needs to be throughout your property, okay, regardless of the vertical again. And so, one of the things that they're doing is, that I've seen, is before they return to work, they are doing studies and doing benchmark testing to see if everyone can bring their own device, can connect to their network, regardless of the carrier. And if it doesn't, then they would seek out a Wilson Connectivity, come in and do a study. And this helps them overcome not only the mobility perspective, but also as we look at different applications now. Again, if we take hospitals, for example, there's a lot of critical applications that need to be ran on a licensed spectrum, okay, because it's more secure, right? And we know it's more secure than Wi-Fi. So we're seeing a little bit more offloading, right, onto the cellular network. They use the Wi-Fi maybe for guest experiences, whatever, but for the critical applications, they're going to run that over the cellular network because it's more secure, right? And it's also a generational thing, right? I pay for my network. I want to use my network. I go to a job site, as I'm seeing in the chat, I want to use my network. And if I can't use this, I'm not going to want to stay on that site. So they understand that they need to have these options. But it's not just a, one fits all. It's going to be a combination. And, also we're seeing these challenges of, who's doing these installs, right? Whether it be a full DAS, or is it going to be a repeater system? You have to make sure that they are done correctly, they're designed correctly. Otherwise, there could be some, imperfections in the system that's ultimately then raises a black eye on the system, right? The cellular system's down, or it's not working correctly. So ensuring that they understand the technology, that you're with a trained partner, as Frank was mentioning, right? You want these vendors that know what they're doing, that come in and they can actually install these systems, install the infrastructure cabling and leverage it correctly. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that cellular systems today are being leveraged within all verticals, right? Whether for critical applications, for mobility, or whether it be just be for wireless, offload, right? Because there's more and more devices connecting. So it's definitely becoming a necessity, and it's an exciting time.
Yeah, so some really great points there. And it's true. You think about cellular. You go to job sites. It used to be the case you would instantly try to get on the Wi-Fi there, and now you never even you don't even do it. You don't even think about doing it usually. So that's a really great point there. And that kind of leads into sort of our next thing, because we are going to talk about end results. We've gone over these key strategies and technologies, but in the end, it comes down to the bottom line. It comes down to the benefits. When IT is utilizing technologies that do let them modernize and manage all of their networks, what are the gains they see? What are the benefits? From our research side, we've gone into some of ours to see some of the top benefits, and we've seen things like better performance. We've seen improved access control. We've seen better management over both users and devices. We've also, talking to our community and hearing from colleagues like Angelo and Frank, we've seen things like improved tenant experience, increased property value, better customer experience for those types of businesses, better support for new technologies, better enablement of public safety, and increased mobile workforce productivity. So, Angelo, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the advantages? What are some of the gains and benefits you've seen from businesses and IT departments that you've worked with that have effectively been able to manage and to a certain degree own their cellular networks?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the major advantages is having occupiers stay within the facility. Having a cellular network makes us all feel comfortable. No matter where we go, we're going to take our phones. We get up from the office, you grab your phone. You go to the bathroom, you grab your phone, right? We always want to stay connected. So having those cellular networks, one, gives us a sense of comfort, but for the properties, it's also, as you mentioned, it can increase the value. As most property owners, it's an asset, and they look to increase the value of that asset. And so when you look at properties, regardless of the vertical, from across from each other, if one has a cellular system and the other one doesn't, then one is going to be more appealing to a potential occupier, right? So portfolio owners, and property investors know that this is something that they need, and it makes it more attractive. And also another advantage of a cellular network is, again, it on a public network, it's going to be licensed spectrum, right? So in security today is a big thing. So in different verticals, they have critical applications that are going to need to be on a more secure network. And we know Wi-Fi is less secure because it's unlicensed spectrum than onto cellular networks. So they're going to move those applications over to those cellular networks. So those are just some key things right there that are, an advantage of the cellular network. Now, being able to monitor it, again, as I mentioned, historically, if there was a problem with a cellular network, right, it would send off an alarm. That alarm would go to a NOC, a network operating center, right? And that would trigger your wireless integrator that says there's an alarm on the system. And then they would see it, and now they would have to deploy out to go troubleshoot. Okay, now they may call in to say, can you please troubleshoot this remote or this connector type or wherever it may be, and IT may not even know where to go. Today, because these systems are running on structured cabling, and they're not on legacy coax systems, the IT feels a little more comfortable. And again, these GUIs are becoming more intuitive and more user-friendly. So again, it gives the power to that first level of triage to that facility manager and the IT department to respond quicker to complaints. So if you have somebody on, let's just say on the 7th floor of a property that says, hey, I can't get on a network, on a cellular network, I have Verizon, it's down, quickly they can go in and see what is causing that, right? And potentially rectify that issue quickly versus having to wait for someone to be deployed out. Again, so that ensures that you're taking care of your occupiers, and you're maintaining folks, connectivity for them. And so it's these cellular systems are becoming more user friendly and more critical. So.
Great. I mean, I thought really good points there. Before we move on, we do have a survey question. We're going to launch that. We're going to continue with our conversation, so you can answer the survey question as we go along. So, Ophelia, we can launch that for attendees to take, but we're going to keep going on. And I also appreciate there's a lot of great questions, both in the chat and in the Q&A. We're going to get to some of those once we're finished with the core portion of the webinar. But I want to get back to something Frank was talking about earlier. He was talking about future proofing, and I do want to talk about what's coming down in the near future. So what opportunities are going to be available to these businesses and organizations from new technologies that are going to be enabled by these increased cellular capabilities from these integrated networks that they're going to be hopefully able to build? So I guess I'll start with you, Angelo, and then we'll start with you, Frank, because you did get a little lead in on some future proofing earlier. But for Angelo, as we look to the future, what should IT and facility managers be planning for when it comes to what's next with technology?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Everyone always wants to have that magic 8-ball, right? What is coming next? And how do you future-proof or are future-ready, as I like to say, for what's coming next? And from a cellular perspective, we know the carriers have been investing in different spectrum, right? So we've seen a shift from low bands to mid bands, and all the carriers spent quite a bit of money on those mid bands, and they've been optimizing their outdoor networks on the cell towers to bring those mid bands, and eventually those mid bands are going to come in. So when you're looking at a cellular network, IT and facility managers should be asking, will this system support those mid bands? And not only will it be able to support it, will it be able to scale without having to introduce new infrastructure, right? Or another layer of technology, because then your total cost of ownership is going up. So these are things, knowing that there's new technology coming, new spectrum coming, those are the questions, because there's a term in the cellular world that nobody likes, a rip and replace, right? We've all experienced it. It's just something that no one likes. You spend a lot of money investing in these systems, and then we go from 3G to 4G, and then your system doesn't support it, so you have to rip it out. So asking the question is, today, does this cellular DAS, distributed antenna system, support not only the low bands, the mid bands, and the high bands, right? What kind of scalability will it have? As we move towards 6G, and Frank, he threw it out there, so we are looking at it, right? Will this system be able to support it? And will there any new hardware have to be introduced, right? Will it require the same amount of fiber connectivity to it and the same amount of power requirement, same space requirement in your head end? Because these are things that are important to facility managers and IT managers.
Frank, I want to kick it back to you. You talked about some of the future proofing. What are some of the future enablements you see coming?
No, and I mean, one of the big things I'll point out here is that, talking about future proofing, with IT or facilities or, whoever is familiar with that structured cabling, this is going to be something they're familiar with, right? This has been something that, I'm sure a company like Panduit or somebody's spoken with them on, and something they're considering, because, I agree with you, rip and replace, nobody wants to do that, right? It's, it's time consuming. It's just, it's kind of money down the drain. And so it is something they're going to be very familiar with. And, having a standards-based, system, right? I mean, that's, if you look on the IT facility side, what have they always had, right? It has been, category 5E, category 6, category 6A, running 1,000 base T, running 10G base T, technologies using 802.11, wireless standards, right? Everything's very standards-based. Everything's very structured, right? So there's a set way to do this. There's a set way to install it. And that, you put in that, fiber optic, OM3, OM4, OM5, right? It's, going to be designed, you're going to have these IEEE standards that are going to run on that, right? So, very much, people in that area know that, let's say you're putting in a category 6A cabling system for copper. I'm only running a gig on it today, but it's going to be able to support up to that 10 gig. And we're doing that very purposely, to make sure that our cabling system, will essentially never have to get rid of it, right? And And I'll tell you guys, from, making sure that that happens, I mean, that needs to be thought of, really as early in the process as possible, right? Starting to talk about it from, essentially day one, when you're going to that consultant, or whoever you're going to, because, because again, if people are looking to do the cheapest option, might be the cheapest option today, but it won't be the cheapest option in, 5-10 years. So.
Yeah, and Frank, I would also, ask and, what your thoughts are, but, I think when we see projects take off, sometimes they're with different stakeholders within an organization. So IT may be worried about, one aspect, and then you have another department worried about it. So then now you have all these different parallel systems running on separate network infrastructure where you can potentially look to, do some kind of convergence, but 9 out of 10 times, they run separate projects, right? And that ultimately kind of adds more complexity to it. And like Frank mentioned, plan on for all of it on day one, right? Come together. Frank, would you not agree?
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up a great point, and I mean, it's something that we're seeing now, even as, and I mentioned real early in the thing, talking about smart buildings, right? That's a challenge because it's different groups now that haven't spoken to each other. And I think the fundamental challenge that, this industry has is, when you look at, okay, you're going to lay out a structured cabling infrastructure to support IT. You're going to go to maybe a consultant or somebody that knows how to do it, just depending on where that knowledge base is. He's only going to be looking today, right? Or, I'd say the poll looked like about 30% of the, or what is it, 70% of the time, he's only going to be looking at the IT stuff because, there's a contractor or, someone that's going to install that, your low voltage guy, all that's going to get done. It's going to be designed around, running data to those different devices. And then, the people that are going to go put in, your products, it's going to be a different group, different system, different plans, possibly even a different vendor, for those fiber optic cables, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it's like you somehow need to bridge that gap very early in the process and say, probably, because there's going to be more cables on the IT side, right? Looking at, going on that IT side, like, hey, we also need, when you're running out these plans, we need to put in, these devices. Let's all talk and make sure it all gets done. But I mean, that to me is where you're going to see the biggest discrepancy is that you're right. It's two different groups, that are doing it, that are, potentially speccing it, buying it, installing it. Somehow we need to get them all on the same page. And to me, it's, really getting them all installed day one. So you're talking about the same, because I'll tell you, I mean, if it's going to be, two different fiber optic vendors, in the same building, right? I mean, I'm already going to tell you that's probably going to be two different guys installing it. So it's, so inevitably they're just going to get run next to each other, right? So the earlier people can bring that in and making sure that, that we see the whole picture, right? Not just our own silos. I think that's critical. So that's my thought on it.
No, I agree with you, Frank. And I think also from what I've seen, when we talk about future readiness and future proofing, unfortunately, historically, Cellular has been the last thing they think about. Okay, they bring in all the other utilities. IT takes care of everything else, all the drops to the desk or to the offices, to conference rooms, right? They plan their TR rooms or IDFs to MDFs, right? Head end space and all their network equipment. And then when the building's constructed and someone's complaining about cellular connectivity, that's when typically it becomes a concern, right? And a need.
Yeah.
And when we go in there to talk about our space requirement, and then we look at the head end or the IDFs, and that they're not sized properly. Like we don't have enough room because they didn't plan for it. Or there's no additional conduit, right? You don't put enough conduit through the property, right? So there's nothing more appealing to me when I go into a property and I see a good enough head end space where I can install a couple racks. I have a spare conduit, right? That's that planning that needs to happen to ensure that we have what we need from the cellular side. And again, if once IT and facility managers understand this, and like Frank mentioned, all come together at once to let's plan this, right? Even though it may be a phase 2 or phase 3 project, but make sure we have the infrastructure and the space and the power and the cooling that we need today.
No, I think you bring up a great point on that. I mean, to me, that is, I think just even laying out the requirements that, in this, in a TR or, in that head end, you just need to make sure that you have X rack units of space available, in the future. I mean, people can plan around that, right? Versus, I would say right now, the marching orders in our industry would be to really, minimize the amount of space that the IT infrastructure takes up. So, that it's not going to be nobody's going to inherently, pat themselves on the back and say, hey, I just left you, with 20 rack units of empty space, right? I mean, that's just not how someone's going to think of it. So,
Right.
But making sure if that can just get thrown in the requirements early on, and then you have the ability to go in and easily install it, that would go a long way. So.
Right. I mean, there was a lot of great stuff from there, and you kind of got into our last thing, but I do want to get sort of like a summation for everything and a recommendation. In our research, looking at the leaders, it got to a lot of stuff, especially like Frank was talking about. It is about being proactive. It is about building to enable innovation, to improve performance and coverage, and to enable better security and compliance. But I'd like to get since we're kind of to summarize a lot of what we were just talking about. If you were say like sharing an Uber with someone or at the bar, a quick drink, what would be your 30-second words of wisdom talking to a facilities or IT manager who is looking to improve cellular connectivity? What would be your sort of, here's my words of wisdom? I'll start with you, Frank, on this.
Well, it's, I would say it's going to ultimately what you're looking to do, right, is you're looking to improve the lives of everybody that's impacted by the building. And, whether you like it or not, if people are going to complain about, if I'm not getting a cell signal and I can't use my cell phone in a building, I'm going to be complaining about it to somebody, right? And it's probably going to go to facilities or IT. And what we're proposing here is just a better way to do it. It's a system where, now you don't have to rely on anybody else, but you're ultimately going to get, just a more productive workforce, happier workforce, and just, and from just an ownership of the building standpoint, as you've been pointing out, Angelo, it's a more valuable building, by doing some, steps where if you do it early enough in the process, it's really not going to be nearly as challenging as trying to come back and doing it in the future. So that would be my, big take on this. And again, we're not talking about anything that's that different, right? From a cabling standpoint, we're now talking about the fiber optics that you're very familiar with managing. So that's my 30 seconds.
Yeah, Angelo?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do this all the time. So when I talk to IT or especially facility managers, look, we want the building not only to be more attractive to potential occupiers, but you want it also to be safer. It is no doubt that today's world, you need cellular in a property. Okay, it's just for the reason for public safety at its best, right? At the bare minimum. But it doesn't have to be challenging anymore. And there's many solutions out there, especially here at Wilson Connectivity, that we can offer to light up your property efficiently to ensure that you have a robust cellular connectivity regardless of the carrier, right? To all floors, to all areas of your property. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be expensive, right? There's new solutions out there. The ways to monitor this, they're a little easier now to monitor from an IT perspective. So take control of your property, regardless of the vertical, make it safer, and look into a cellular network. And again, it's not going to be one size fit all. We're not saying it's going to replace Wi-Fi, but you definitely need a cellular network today.
Great. And with that, I want to thank Frank and Angelo. That was a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground here. And I want to bring Ophelia back because we've got a lot of great questions, a lot of great activity in the chats. I mean, there's so many things we can get to, and if we don't get to it, we'll try to respond in chat or in the Q&A. But yeah, Ophelia, when we get into it, when we still have some time.
Yeah. All right. I'll just dive right in here. Here's a two-parter. What observations could you share in terms of thinking about some of the advantages of cellular connectivity over Wi-Fi, and in thinking about private and public 5G?
Okay, I'll take that one. So cellular over Wi-Fi, that's been an argument for a while, right? Will one replace the other? And as I said in my last statement, it won't, right? You're always going to need both. Where we look at cellular, again, it runs on licensed spectrum, and so it is more encrypted, right? The encryption on it is higher than just Wi-Fi, so that it is more secure, and security becomes a priority. When you look at private versus like a private 5G network, okay, now you're using a different spectrum, CBRS. You may have heard of it, but it can offer up speeds up like to 20 gigabits a second, right? I mean, and so that's just unbelievable, right? Versus Wi-Fi, typically maybe 10 gig, right? You're getting 20 gig on, 20 gig on a private. So just on the speed alone, and then when you look at bandwidth as we're moving toward these higher spectrums of a public network on a cellular, the bandwidth and the latency alone is significantly higher than today's Wi-Fi standard. Now, there's new Wi-Fi technology coming, right? That's going to close that gap. But every time a next generation of Wi-Fi moves up, we get the next layer of cellular, right? You get another G, and so 6G is going to be a little different. And then also you look at coverage. Typically, on a cellular network, a licensed spectrum network, you're going to have a greater coverage area, right? It can also penetrate different building materials greater than a Wi-Fi network. So there are definitely some advantages, and there's definitely some disadvantages as well, right? So, but today, like I said, you're going to have both of them. You're not going to just be able to replace one for the other.
All right. This is a good one, I think. What advice would you give to help IT decision makers become more comfortable with connectivity technology and with including it in their planning process?
What if I can? Ooh, that's a tough one. I could try to take that one. I don't know if it's really advice. It would just be, as you're laying out the IT plans, plan for cellular, right? And because of all the wonderful things Angelo, just said, and we agree with him, right? I think for a while, Panduit, I've seen some things in the chat box about, Wi-Fi calling and whatnot. We thought that might be a thing, but we would tell everybody it is Wi-Fi and cellular, right? You need both in a facility. I mean, it's just, Wi-Fi calling to me, it's a nice workaround from time to time, but it just does not replace the advantage of having your cell phone just inherently work in a facility. So, to me, it really is just, getting the engagement and getting that, those cables and that design, at least room for it put in up front. So making, I would just say minimally having, the specifications needed to ensure that, your head end, your TRs have the space available and the cables available, to run, these in building cellular networks. That would be, kind of the advice I would give on it.
Okay, let's squeeze a couple more in here. Have you noticed differences with IT and perceptions between IT decision makers in commercial real estate and outside of commercial real estate?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So yes, definitely there's been changes, right, in the IT world. As I mentioned, there's been a shift from carriers paying for these networks to now the property owners are going to have to look at it as a fourth utility. So as these cellular systems become, they start moving towards standard IT cabling, IT folks now are taking more interest in understanding these networks and maybe potentially looking at, is this something that they can monitor? Can they add that to their job requirement, because maybe it gives them, more responsibilities that they want, right? They don't want to go someplace else, right? They can, for a reason. But we're seeing this more and more where IT is asking, because they may are the first ones to get a call, them or facility managers, that I have an issue with my cellular network within commercial real estate. Occupier is going to call them, a tenant's going to call them about something. So they're now learning more and becoming more interested, especially since I think it's becoming more known that the carriers aren't spending. So it's an issue that they're going to have to address. No different than, hey, we lost power on our floor, or the AC doesn't work, or whatever it may be, right? Hey, now the cellular. So they are taking interest. And outside of commercial real estate, it's the same thing. Cellular is now connectivity. Connectivity is that fourth utility, whether it be cellular or Wi-Fi, we must have connectivity. So.
Okay, and just to kind of dovetail off that, I think this question will round us out. In general, how would you describe IT's involvement in and perception of their role regarding cellular connectivity and the cellular connectivity network?
Yeah, so I will say, again, they're getting more involved, right? Today, their IT is used to managing their network, right? Managing all the connections. When you're having, folks move offices, they're having to, check the ports, make sure there's connectivity. And so with cellular networks as well, when you have, different folks or different tenants moving to space, one things that they are able to do is to log into these systems and to ensure that there is cellular connectivity. They can answer those questions. They're going to ask, does your property have a cellular connectivity today? Will I be able to bring any device? Can my employees bring any device, any carrier? And they're going to be able to answer those questions. And they're going to be able to respond. So they're getting more involved. They're definitely asking more questions, especially around, what type of infrastructure do you need? Does your system run on fiber or is it traditional coax? How much space are you going to require within the head end? How much power? How much cooling? Because all this is going to be critical to them, because within a property, regardless of the vertical, space is limited typically, right? So they want to understand that, because they're going to be responsible for managing those closets, those MDFs, right? So that all comes into play into a cellular network. So.
Okay, and so I want to give you guys the opportunity to share any closing thoughts, final statements before I wrap us up.
So I'll start. So just for everyone on the call, I want to thank you for attending. Here, at Wilson Connectivity, it's an exciting time for us. We changed our name, we rebranded to Wilson Connectivity because we believe in connectivity, and we have connectivity solutions, all shapes and sizes, from small, medium, large, vertical spaces, right? And regardless of the vertical. I see a lot of great questions, and I would love to answer all of them. Please just reach out to the moderator here and with your questions, and we'll try to reach back out to you. But definitely, please consider cellular, and don't run away from it, and don't be scared of it. So I appreciate everyone joining this call. Frank?
Well, thank you. I was happy to be offered the chance to be a part of this panel. I'd say a big thing we've been talking about Panduit for a long time now is just this element of convergence. And to me, everything we're talking about here is just another piece of that puzzle, right? Where, people want, that connectivity. They want, to be able to do everything, and, really thinking about that, and making, your cellular, communication part of that overall plan and part of that convergence, is just going to lead to a better building, better experience for everybody. So, really consider, that considering now it is the same cabling and that same infrastructure. So, but yeah, it's, it's going to be a critical part of buildings going forward. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys. That was a great conversation. I hope everybody learned something. As Angela said, we can go back and get back to some of the questions, and we will do that. And yeah, thanks everyone. I'll hand it back to Ophelia to wrap everything up.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to quadruple down on the thank yous and say thank you to Wilson Connectivity and to you, Jim, Angelo, and Frank, for this wonderful conversation and sharing your expertise with us. I want to remind everybody that this presentation will be available on demand after we finish, and that there are additional resources, so be sure to check those out in the Docs tab. And there were a lot of wonderful questions, and like they said, we will get to those and then provide their team, and so that they can get back to you. And lastly, check the chat where we are announcing our prize winner. So congratulations, and I'll be in touch with you soon in the community. And with that, I'd like to say stay safe and keep it spicy. Have a great day, everyone.